The restaurant holds its breath. Elena's hand trembles. 1,000 heartbeats in 1 second. A single bottle of wine that costs more than she earns in a month. And the man across from her, the one everyone fears, watching her with eyes that have ended lives. She will never be invisible again. But first she will spill everything. It's a Tuesday night at La Notte Ristorante, Manhattan's most exclusive dining establishment, where the lighting is intentionally dim, not romantic, but conspiratorial. Dark mahogany paneling covers every wall, carved with intricate patterns that have absorbed the whispered secrets of organized crime for the better part of 2 decades. Crystal chandeliers hang from the ceiling like frozen tears, their light filtered through layers of expensive cigar smoke that drifts between the private booths like specters. Each table is set with the precision of a surgical instrument. Bernardeau, porcelain plates, Baccarat crystal glasses, Christophe silverware arranged in strict geometrical patterns. The white tablecloths are starched so stiffly they could serve as architectural blueprints. A single candlestick sits in the center of each table, its flame frozen in a permanent flicker. Elena has worked here for 3 months, and in those 3 months, she has become exceptionally good at being invisible. She has learned that the men who dine at La Notte, with their $1,000 watches and custom-tailored suits and the quiet authority that emanates from them, like a second cologne, do not actually see the people who serve them. They look through them, past them, around them. A waitress is less substantial than air. She is simply part of the restaurant's infrastructure, like the heating system or the baseboards. Elena prefers it this way. Her previous job at a diner in Queens had ended badly. Her ex-boyfriend Marcus had made sure of that. He had made sure of a lot of things. The restraining order he violated 3 times, the broken arm she'd had to explain to a sympathetic emergency room doctor, the constant fear that had become so familiar it felt like her own skin. She'd saved enough from the diner job to escape to Manhattan, to become someone new, to exist in a place where Marcus would never find her. Working at La Notte was perfect because the money was good. Obscenely good, actually, given that the men here tipped like they were trying to pay their way into heaven, and because no one asked questions. No one asked about her past. No one asked about the scar, or the scar above her left eyebrow, or the way she sometimes flinched when someone moved too quickly. No one asked anything at all. She simply existed in the margins, collected her money, and tried very hard not to think about what her mother would say if she knew that her daughter was surviving in the cracks of organized crime. Tonight, however, Elena's invisibility is going to become a very visible, very dangerous liability. She is finishing up a table of relatively minor players, money launderers, she thinks, or perhaps mid-level drug dealers when Marco appears in the doorway. She recognizes him immediately. Everyone recognizes Marco. He's 6 feet 4 inches of carefully maintained muscle, with a shaved head that reflects the candlelight like a polished mahogany table, and a beard so thick and perfectly groomed it seems impossible that it's part of a human face. He's wearing his usual uniform, black suit, no tie, dark sunglasses even though it's nighttime and he's indoors. There's a gold tooth visible when he smiles, which he almost never does. He's not smiling now. Instead, he's scanning the restaurant with the systematic awareness of someone whose entire job is to ensure that nothing surprises his employer ever again. When he spots Elena, he gives a nearly imperceptible nod to the manager, Giuseppe, who suddenly appears at her side with an expression that could best be described as carefully controlled panic. "The private dining room," he says quietly, his Italian accent thickening with stress. "He's coming, and so is the Castellano contingent." Elena's stomach drops. She's heard the other waitstaff whispering about the private dining room. This restaurant has 7 of them, each more luxurious than any restaurant most people will ever eat at in their entire lives. But the largest one, the one that seats 20 and has its own wine cellar access, is reserved for only the most important meetings. The meetings where fortunes are won and lost, where territories are divided or consolidated, where men make decisions about other men's lives. You'll be serving the Ferraro table specifically, Giuseppe continues, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. Alone. No one else goes in that room. You take the order, you bring the wine, you bring the courses, and you do not, under any circumstances, make eye contact. Do you understand me? You could literally be holding a live grenade and you would not make eye contact. Elena nods, her throat suddenly very dry. Ferraro. The name carries weight in Manhattan's underworld like an anchor carries weight in the Atlantic. Dominic Ferraro, the man who took over his family's operations at the age of 28 and immediately reorganized them with the precision of someone who should have been running a Fortune 500 company instead of running crime syndicates. The man who has been photographed exactly 3 times in the past decade, and those photographs have been analyzed by criminology students as if they were terracotta warriors. The man who is, according to the breathless whispers she's overheard while clearing tables, absolutely incapable of being surprised, corrupted, or reasoned with if he's decided you're a liability. He's also only 34 years old. In a career that typically leads either to prison or a shallow grave before 40, he is an anomaly, a man whose reach extends across the entire tri-state area and whose reputation extends even further, into circles where power is measured in blood and silence. Elena has never seen him in person before, though she's worked at Lenotte for 3 months. She's heard his voice once through the kitchen door, a low rumble of Italian mixed with English, but that was during lunch service, and she only caught a fragment of a word. Now she's going to be alone in a room with him. She's going to serve him dinner. She's going to hold expensive bottles of wine over his head and pour them without shaking so badly that she spills the liquid assets of a small country across his suit. The evening progresses with the speed of a funeral march. Elena changes into a fresh white shirt. Her other one had a water spot on the left shoulder, completely invisible to anyone else, but somehow catastrophically visible to her, and returns to her station. The private dining room is up a small spiral staircase that branches off from the main dining area. It's accessed through a heavy door made of dark wood with brass fixtures that look like they were stolen from a Victorian bank. Inside, it's a study in controlled opulence. Deep burgundy walls, a massive table of polished dark wood that probably cost more than her annual salary, and artwork that she suspects is either original or an absolutely flawless forgery. The room smells like old money and decisions that affect people's lives. When Dominic arrives, and she knows he's arrived because the entire restaurant seems to suddenly inhale and hold its breath, Elena is arranging the place settings for the 3rd time, trying to ensure that each knife, fork, and spoon is positioned with mathematical precision. She doesn't look up. Giuseppe's warning reverberates in her mind. Do not make eye contact. She hears him before she sees him. That low voice, but deeper now, closer, with an undertone of authority so complete that it sounds almost reasonable, almost gentle. He's speaking Italian to Marco. Something about the weather, of all things. The weather. As if they're 2 ordinary men about to have 2 ordinary men's dinner. Elena keeps her eyes on the table, though her peripheral vision catches the movement, the shadow of his form as he passes, the rustle of expensive fabric, the subtle scent of his cologne, something dark and masculine, with notes of cedar and something that might be leather. She still doesn't look up, not when she hears him sit down, not when she hears him adjusting his chair, not when she hears the small clink of him placing his watch on the table, a sound so quiet most people wouldn't notice it. But Elena notices it because her entire nervous system has become attuned to every detail in this room. Victor Castellano arrives with his own entourage about 10 minutes later, and there's something about the energy of his arrival that is immediately wrong. It's the energy of a man who arrives at a meeting thinking he has leverage. It's the energy of someone who doesn't understand the specific calculus of danger he's standing in the middle of. Elena finally glances up, just briefly, just enough to confirm that he's indeed as well dressed as rumor has it in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than a car, before returning her focus to the tablecloths. Both men have chosen to sit at the same long table rather than opposite each other, which somehow makes the entire situation feel even more fraught. They're not enemies meeting in combat. They're equals meeting to discuss business, or at least one of them believes they're equals. Elena brings out the wine list, hands it to Marco, who takes it without looking at her, for which she is profoundly grateful, and returns to standing at her appointed distance. She's been told to position herself by the door, within easy reach for refills or additional courses, but far enough away that she's essentially background noise. Invisible. It's what she's good at. The men begin to talk. It starts innocuously enough. Comments about the economy, the state of certain businesses, a mutual acquaintance who has apparently gotten himself into legal trouble. But gradually, over the course of the first course, antipasti prosciutto di Parma, burrata, grilled octopus, the conversation begins to take on an edge. Victor's voice becomes slightly more nasal, his word choices slightly more provocative. He's testing boundaries. Elena recognizes the dynamic because she lived through it with Marcus. Someone pushing further and further, looking for the exact point at which a reasonable person will snap. Dominic, for his part, doesn't seem to be moving toward that point. If anything, he seems to be getting calmer. His responses become shorter, more measured. There's something deeply frightening about a man who becomes quieter the more threatened he feels. At the end of the first course, Elena clears the plates. She's efficient, trained, invisible, in and out in less than 2 minutes. She places water glasses back on the table with the precision of someone defusing a bomb. As she retreats to her station by the door, the second course arrives from the kitchen, a slow braised osso al buco with saffron risotto, plated with the kind of artistry that belongs in a gallery rather than on a dinner table. Elena carries the plates in, sets them down without a sound, and steps back. Victor picks up his fork and examines the dish with the kind of exaggerated appreciation that suggests he's performing for an audience. "Beautiful presentation," he says. "Your chef has outdone himself." Dominic doesn't touch his plate. He watches Victor eat with the same patient, calculating expression that Elena has been studying all evening. "I didn't invite you here to discuss the food, Victor." "No," Victor agrees, dabbing his mouth with the linen napkin. "You invited me here to discuss the Colombo shipments, which, if I'm not mistaken, have been arriving 3 days late for the past 2 months. Dominic's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. They've been arriving late because your people at the port have been rerouting containers through secondary inspection channels, containers that were pre-cleared. Victor sets down his fork and leans back in his chair. The cream suit stretches across his shoulders in a way that suggests he's been spending money on tailoring, but not on the gym. Pre-cleared by whom? Your arrangement with the harbor master expired 6 months ago. Did you think I wouldn't notice? "I think," Dominic says slowly, "that you noticed a great deal more than you should have, which raises the question of how you came by that particular piece of information." The silence that follows is dense enough to cut with a knife. Elena can hear the ticking of Dominic's watch from across the room, or perhaps that's her own heartbeat hammering against her rib cage. She forces herself to breathe evenly, to remain absolutely still, to become nothing more than a shadow against the wallpaper. Victor laughs, a short, sharp sound that doesn't reach his eyes. "Information is currency, Dominic. You know that better than anyone. Your father taught you that, didn't he? Before the business passed to you." The mention of Dominic's father sends a ripple through the room that Elena can feel in her bones. It's like watching someone casually toss a match into a room full of gasoline. The explosion hasn't happened yet, but the chemical inevitability of it hangs in the air like a premonition. Dominic picks up his wine glass, swirls the Cabernet with a slow, deliberate motion, and takes a single sip. When he sets it down, the glass makes no sound at all against the tablecloth. "My father," he says, "taught me many things. One of them was the importance of knowing exactly when a business relationship has run its course. Victor's smile falters for just a fraction of a second. It's so brief that most people wouldn't catch it, but Elena catches it because she's been trained by years of survival to read the micro-expressions that precede violence. The slight tightening around the eyes, the almost invisible clench of the jaw, the way his fingers curl inward just slightly before relaxing again. "Are you suggesting our relationship has run its course?" Victor asks. "I'm suggesting," Dominic replies, "that the terms of our arrangement were clear, and that you've been operating outside those terms for quite some time now. The port was the beginning. The warehouse in Red Hook was the middle. And whatever you're about to propose tonight, that, Victor, will be the end." Elena watches Victor process this. She can practically see the gears turning behind his eyes, recalculating his position, reassessing the leverage he thought he held. He reaches for his wine glass and takes a long drink, too long, too deep, the kind of drink that betrays nervousness no matter how steady the hand that holds the glass. "You're well informed," Victor concedes. "Better informed than I expected." "I'm always better informed than people expect," Dominic says. "It's one of my more useful qualities." The kitchen door opens briefly, and Elena catches a glimpse of the sous chef peering out with wide eyes before the door swings shut again. Everyone in this restaurant knows that something extraordinary is happening in this private room, even if they can't hear the words being spoken. The energy radiating from behind the closed door is enough to make the entire staff move in hushed, careful steps, like attendants in a church during a sermon that has taken an unexpected and deeply unsettling turn. Victor leans forward again. His cologne, something expensive and slightly too sweet, reaches Elena from across the room. He's sweating now, just slightly, just enough that the cologne is amplified by body heat. "Let me be direct then," he says, "since you appreciate directness." "Please," Dominic says, and the word is so polite, so perfectly courteous, that it somehow carries more menace than any threat could. Victor straightens his tie, a nervous habit that Elena catalogs automatically, the same way she used to catalog Marcus's tells before the shouting started, and shifts his weight in the leather chair. The movement causes his jacket to fall open slightly, and Elena catches a brief glimpse of something dark and metallic holstered beneath his left arm. She forces herself not to react, not to change her breathing, not to do anything that might draw attention to what she's just seen. She files it away alongside everything else she's noticed tonight. The sweat on Victor's upper lip, the way his men position themselves by the exits, the slight tremor in his left hand that suggests either too much caffeine or not enough nerve for the game he's chosen to play. Victor leans forward with the expression of a man who is about to play what he believes is his strongest card. She's thinking about what courses to serve next, about whether they want another bottle opened. The Cabernet is nearly finished when Victor leans forward. His voice drops. He's saying something about business, about territory, about... Elena freezes, her hand halfway to her water pitcher. He says, "Your children will have an accident waiting to happen. The twins, they're quite exposed these days, aren't they?" The room doesn't just go cold. The room undergoes a fundamental transformation in the nature of its reality. Elena can feel it physically, like the temperature has dropped 30 degrees in a single second. She looks at Dominic without meaning to, muscle memory overriding conscious choice, and for just an instant, she sees something in his expression that terrifies her far more than his reputation ever could. It's not rage. It's not anger. It's something far more dangerous, a complete recalibration. A man whose entire world has just been reconfigured and who is now running through contingencies and consequences with the speed of a supercomputer. His dark eyes fix on Victor with an intensity that could probably burn through steel. And then, almost as if in a dream, Elena's hand slips. It's not a deliberate stumble. She doesn't black out or pass out or fall to her knees. It's just the smallest loss of motor control, the briefest moment of distraction. But it's enough. The bottle of 1982 Château Lafite Rothschild, a wine so rare that there are fewer than 300 bottles remaining in existence, a wine that costs approximately $5,000, a wine that is truly irreplaceable, tips from its cradle in her hands. For a moment, it seems to hang suspended in the air, as if the universe itself is allowing one final instant for Elena to imagine a reality in which this doesn't happen. And then gravity reasserts itself. The bottle tips, the cork, which had been sealed nearly 50 years ago, points downward, and the wine, beautiful, deep red wine the color of arterial blood, begins to pour. It pours across the white tablecloth. It pours across the Christoffel silverware. It pours across the hand, and the wrists, and the sleeve of Dominic Ferraro's charcoal gray three-piece suit. It spreads across the dark fabric like a stain, and Elena can only watch, suspended in absolute horror, as the seconds stretch and expand, and a bottle of $5,000 wine soaks into the jacket of the most dangerous man in New York City. The sound in the room is a very specific kind of silence. It's not the absence of sound, it's the presence of utter, absolute stillness. Even the candlelight seems to stop flickering. Marco's hand moves toward his jacket, a fraction of an inch, just enough that Elena knows he's ready for whatever comes next. The other men in the room, Castellanos' associates, positioned near the walls, are also moving, slowly, deliberately, reaching for weapons with the cold precision of men who have done this before. Victor's expression shifts from whatever he was feeling before into something that might be triumph, might be fear, might be the dark satisfaction of watching someone else's world burn. And Dominic just stares at the wine. He stares at his suit. He stares at Elena. His hand, the one wearing the heavy silver signet ring, is suspended mid-air over the table. His jaw tightens, and then, in a voice so quiet that Elena almost doesn't hear it, he says, "Everyone out, except her." It's not loud. It's not a shout. It's something far worse. It's the tone of a man for whom volume is irrelevant because compliance is inevitable. Marco's hand drops from his jacket. The other men look at each other in brief confusion, as if they need to verify that they heard correctly. Dominic's eyes don't move from Elena's face. He says it again, and this time his tone suggests that he understands there are some people who might not have heard him the first time. Out now. The men begin to file out of the room. Victor starts to stand, and Dominic, still without looking at him, says, "Not you, Victor. Stay, but everyone else." Elena watches as Castellanos' men exit, followed by Marco, followed by a few of Dominic's own people. The door closes with a soft click that sounds far too quiet to be the sound that seals her fate. And suddenly, Elena is alone in a room with two of the most dangerous men in Manhattan. Dominic still hasn't moved. His suit is soaked in wine. The bottle is still in Elena's hand. And she looks down at it stupidly, as if wondering whether she should offer to pour the rest. She watches a single drop of wine fall from the lip of the bottle onto the floor. It hits the marble with a soft patter. When Dominic finally speaks, his voice is eerily calm. "Put down the bottle, carefully." Elena does exactly what he says. Her hands are shaking so badly that she nearly drops it, but she manages to set it down on the table with only a minor sound. He stands up. He's even taller when he's standing, 6'2", broad-shouldered, the full weight of his physical presence suddenly bearing down on the small space. He shrugs off his suit jacket. Underneath, he's wearing a black dress shirt, and the wine has soaked through it as well, creating a darker stain across his ribs and stomach. He pulls the shirt up, examines the damage, then looks back at Elena. His expression is unreadable. "Do you know what that wine cost?" he asks. It's not an angry question. It's a curious question. Like he genuinely wants to understand whether she comprehends the magnitude of her mistake. Elena's mouth is dry. She's thinking about what her mother would say, about what this moment means, about whether she's going to die. $5,000, she stammers. Approximately. Dominic nods slowly. $5,000. 1982, Château Lafite, Rothschild. There are only a few bottles like this remaining in the entire world. My sommelier has been searching for this particular vintage for 2 years. 2 years. He steps closer to her, and Elena forces herself not to back away. Every instinct she has is screaming at her to retreat, to flee, to do something other than stand her ground. But she's learned, in her time since leaving Marcus, that running only makes predators chase. Sometimes standing still, sometimes forcing yourself to face the thing you're afraid of, is the only way to survive. "Why are you not afraid of me?" Dominic asks. It's an honest question. He seems genuinely puzzled. Elena's hands are still trembling. Her heart is still hammering in her chest, but something in his question, the genuine curiosity in it, makes her answer truthfully. "I am afraid of you," she says, "but I'm more afraid of him." She glances at Victor, who is watching this entire exchange with an expression of dark amusement. "He threatened your children." Dominic's entire body goes very still. It's the kind of stillness that comes right before an explosion. His eyes, which were focused on Elena, shift to Victor, and in those eyes, Victor Castellano finally sees something that makes him understand, truly understand, the magnitude of his miscalculation. "Did he?" Dominic says softly. It's not a question. It's a statement of fact, being catalogued and filed and added to a ledger that, once completed, will require immediate settlement. He turns back to Elena. "What exactly did he say?" Elena swallows hard. She knows that she's about to cross a line. She knows that once she speaks these words, she can't take them back. She knows that she's about to involve herself deeply, irrevocably, in something that might be far more dangerous than she understands. But she also knows that she heard something that matters. That something she saw or heard in this room might be the difference between a man's children being safe or not being safe. And she spent enough of her life looking away from danger, ignoring red flags, pretending not to see things she knew she should pay attention to. She's done being invisible. He said they were exposed, that an accident was waiting to happen. Dominic nods slowly. He walks to the window, a tall window that overlooks Manhattan's glittering skyline, and stares out at the city for a long moment. When he finally speaks again, his voice is different. It's still dangerous, still carrying that weight of complete certainty, but there's something else underneath it now, something almost vulnerable. "My ex-wife died in an accident 3 years ago," he says quietly. "Car crash. Everyone said it was just an accident, just a terrible coincidence, but I've always known it wasn't. I've always known that Castellano had his hand in it. I've never had the proof. I've never had enough certainty to act, but I've always known." He turns back to Elena. "And you just told me that he's threatening to do the same thing to my children. Thank you." Elena blinks. "Thank you? The most dangerous man in New York has just thanked her for spilling $5,000 of wine on his suit." Behind her, Victor is starting to stand, and Elena can see his hand moving toward his jacket. But Marco is already back inside the room before Victor can move more than a few inches. It's almost as if he was waiting just outside the door, anticipating exactly this sequence of events. Victor's hand drops. He slowly sits back down. Dominic walks over to the table and stares at him for a long moment. "Your contract with the Moretti family is terminated," he says calmly. "Your territory in Brooklyn is surrendered. And if I ever hear another threat against my children, I will make your death so slow that you'll spend the final year of your life wondering if it's already happening, or if this is just the beginning." He pauses. "Get out of my restaurant. Get out of my city, and count yourself incredibly fortunate that I need you alive for the next 24 hours. Victor's face cycles through several shades of red. He stands up, his expensive suit no longer quite so impressive when he's being ordered around like a common criminal. He leaves without a word, his men following behind him. The door closes. The room is suddenly very quiet. Dominic turns back to Elena. "What's your name?" he asks. "Elena," she says. "Elena Rossi." Well, Elena Rossi, you've just earned yourself a very unique position in my organization. He starts to walk toward her, and Elena forces herself to stand still. You're observant, you notice things, and you had the courage to speak the truth about those things. Those are rare qualities. Elena's brain is struggling to process this sequence of events. Approximately 5 minutes ago, she was a waitress terrified of making eye contact. Now she's being offered some kind of position in a crime organization by the man whose suit she just destroyed. I'm not sure I understand, she says. Dominic smiles. It's not a large smile, more of a slight curve of his lips, but it transforms his entire face. He looks younger when he smiles, more human. Neither do I, really, he admits. But I have a feeling I want you close, where I can see you, where I can understand how your mind works. He pauses. Also, Marco needs to make sure you get home safely. We have a situation that has just become very urgent. Elena nods. She has no idea what she's agreed to, but she understands that agreeing is the only option available to her. 20 minutes later, she's in the back of a dark Maybach, a luxury sedan so expensive that the interior leather probably has a higher thread count than most people's sheets, sitting next to Marco while Dominic's driver navigates the wet streets of Manhattan. It's started to rain, and the city lights reflect in the puddles like scattered diamonds. Marco hasn't spoken the entire ride, but his presence is somehow comforting. He's clearly very good at his job, and his job apparently involves keeping her alive. She trusts that. The Maybach pulls up to her apartment building in Washington Heights, a 4-story walk-up that somehow manages to be both charming and desperately in need of renovation. Marco walks her to the door, examines the lock, frowns and says, "Don't open this door for anyone unless it's me or Dominic. Understood?" Elena nods. Understood. She climbs the stairs to her apartment on the 3rd floor. The hallway smells like someone else is cooking. Probably Mrs. Chen from 3B, who makes the most incredible dumplings and leaves them outside her door for her son to pick up. The fluorescent lights in the stairwell flicker as she passes the 2nd landing, casting strange shadows on the water-stained walls. Someone has left a bicycle chained to the railing again, and she has to squeeze past it, her restaurant shoes slipping on the worn linoleum. Elena's apartment is small, a studio that she's somehow made homey, with some carefully chosen secondhand furniture and a lot of plants. There's a fern on the windowsill that she's been nursing back to health for 2 months, and a small bookshelf crammed with paperbacks she picks up from the dollar bins at the Strand. The walls are painted a soft cream color. She did it herself during her first weekend here, covering the previous tenant's unfortunate shade of mint green. There's a photograph of her mother on the nightstand, taken in Sicily before Elena was born, showing a young woman with the same hazel green eyes standing in front of a lemon grove with the Mediterranean sparkling behind her. Elena locks the door, slides the chain into place, and then, for good measure, drags the small wooden chair from her desk and wedges it under the doorknob. It's a habit she developed during her time with Marcus, when locks alone weren't enough to make her feel safe. She leans against the door and presses her palms flat against the cool painted wood, willing her heartbeat to slow down. The events of the evening feel surreal, like scenes from a movie she watched rather than lived through. She can still feel the phantom weight of the wine bottle in her hand, can still see the deep crimson spreading across Dominic's charcoal suit, can still feel the electricity of his gaze when he looked up at her. She peels off her work clothes. The white button-down is stained with wine at the cuff, and her burgundy apron smells like fear sweat and expensive cologne. She showers in the tiny bathroom where the water pressure is unreliable and the tiles are cracked in the corner, letting the hot water run over her shoulders until the tension begins to unknot from her muscles. She dresses in comfortable clothes, gray sweatpants, and an oversized university sweatshirt from the master's program she never finished, the one in forensic psychology at Columbia that she'd been halfway through when Marcus made it impossible to continue. She makes herself tea, chamomile, because her mother always said chamomile was the cure for everything that ailed the soul, and sits on her bed with the mug warming her hands. She tries to watch television, but finds herself unable to focus. The apartment feels smaller than usual, the walls pressing in, every creak and groan of the old building magnified into potential threats. She picks up the worn, leather journal from her apron pocket, her mother's journal, filled with recipes and pressed flowers, and notes in Italian that Elena has read so many times, the ink is beginning to fade. She holds it against her chest like a talisman. Her mind keeps replaying the moment the bottle fell, the moment Dominic realized what Victor had threatened, the moment he looked at her with something that might have been respect. She replays the conversation in the private dining room, Dominic's questions coming rapid and precise, each one designed to establish exactly what she knew and why she reacted. She remembers the way Victor's smile had faltered when Dominic dismissed everyone, the way the older man's cold blue eyes had tracked her as she spoke, cataloging her face, memorizing her features, filing her away as a loose end that would need to be dealt with. Elena knows what it means to be a loose end. Marcus taught her that. In her old life back in Philadelphia, she'd been a promising graduate student with a specialty in behavioral analysis. She could read microexpressions, identify deception patterns, detect the subtle shifts in body language that betrayed a person's true intentions. It was this skill, this curse, really, that had first attracted Marcus to her, and then made her dangerous to him. Because she could see through the charm. She could see the violence hiding behind the smile, the calculation behind the romantic gestures. And when she finally tried to leave, when she finally packed a bag and called a friend and made it to the women's shelter on Broad Street, Marcus had found her within 48 hours. The restraining order was a piece of paper. The broken arm was a reality check. The bus ticket to New York was her last resort. She'd arrived in Manhattan with $600, a duffel bag, and her mother's journal, and she'd sworn to herself that she would become invisible. She would disappear into the fabric of the city, just another face in a crowd of 8 million faces, and she would never again let anyone see her clearly enough to hurt her. And she'd succeeded. For 3 months, she'd been nobody. A waitress at Lenotte who smiled at the right moments and disappeared into the kitchen between courses. A ghost who paid rent in cash and kept her head down and never made eye contact with the men in expensive suits who talked about things that nobody should talk about in public, until tonight. Until a $5,000 bottle of wine and a man with dark eyes and a scar along his jawline changed everything. She's still awake at 3 a.m, the chamomile long gone cold, her mother's journal still pressed against her chest, when she hears the sound downstairs. It's subtle, just the soft scrape of a window being forced open in the basement level unit. Elena's heart immediately begins to race. She grabs her phone, considers calling 911, then realizes that explaining the situation to the police might be even worse than whatever is about to happen. Instead, she sends a text to the number Marco gave her before leaving the restaurant. Someone is breaking in, downstairs. The response is almost immediate. Stay in your apartment, lock the door, don't come out. Elena sits on her bed, heart pounding, listening to the sounds of someone moving through her building. Footsteps on the stairs. Someone trying the lock on her door. A moment of silence. Whoever it is, they're picking the lock. She's reaching for the phone again when there's a sound that makes her freeze. A different footstep coming fast, followed by shouting. There's a brief scuffle, the sound of something heavy hitting the wall, and then silence. Then Marco's voice muffled through the door. All clear. It's Marco. Elena opens the door to find Marco standing in her hallway next to a man she doesn't recognize. The man is nursing a split lip and appears to be assessing his odds of making it to the stairs before Marco catches up with him. They're not good odds. This is one of Castellano's people, Marco says calmly. He was planning to use you as leverage. That's not going to happen. He gestures to the man who immediately stumbles toward the stairs, leaving a small trail of blood on the wall. Come downstairs. Dominic is waiting. Elena grabs a jacket and follows Marco into the rainy Manhattan night. The Maybach is still idling outside, and when she gets in, she finds Dominic in the back seat. He's changed out of his wine-stained suit into dark jeans and a black crewneck sweater, with the sleeves pushed up. revealing the full extent of the Sicilian family crest tattoo that covers his entire left arm. Roses and skulls, intertwined in an intricate design that probably took months to complete. Script tattoos run across his knuckles, words in Italian that she can't quite read from where she's sitting. He looks younger like this, less like the most dangerous man in New York and more like a man. Just a man, with the weight of far too much responsibility and a problem that might require her help to solve. "I'm sorry," she says immediately. "I don't want to be involved in this. I just want—" "I know what you want," Dominic interrupts quietly. "You want to disappear? You want to be invisible? You want to go back to being a waitress in a restaurant where no one asks questions about your past?" He leans forward, his dark eyes searching her face. "But you can't do that anymore, because now Castellano knows about you. Now his men know about you. And now you're either very dangerous to me or very useful to me. I'm going to give you a choice." He reaches into a pocket and pulls out a manila envelope. "Option 1, I give you enough money to disappear. New identity, new city, completely fresh start. You never see me again. You never see anyone from this world again. And you live out the rest of your life knowing that the only reason you're alive is because I chose not to use you against Castellano." He sets the envelope on the seat. "Option 2, you stay. Not as a waitress, as part of my organization. I teach you how to survive in this world. I teach you how to move through it without being destroyed by it. And you use that intelligence of yours, that ability to see things, to understand things, to notice things, to help me." He pauses. "Next, your choice." Elena stares at the envelope. She thinks about Marcus, about running, about disappearing. She thinks about spending the rest of her life waiting for someone to find her. She thinks about spending the rest of her life invisible. Then she picks up the envelope and hands it back to Dominic. "I choose to stay," she says. Dominic nods slowly, and for the second time that evening, he smiles. "Good," he says. "Then we need to get you somewhere safe. I have a place. It's not fancy, but it's secure. And I think you and I have a lot to talk about." The Maybach pulls into traffic, heading downtown toward whatever the rest of Elena's life is going to be. Outside, the rain continues to fall, and the city continues to move, indifferent to the small drama unfolding inside this car. Somewhere in Brooklyn, Victor Castellano is making very urgent phone calls, unaware that the call to his life is already being placed. Somewhere in his penthouse, Dominic's twins are asleep, never knowing how close they came to being used as leverage. And somewhere in the back of a car driving through rain-soaked Manhattan streets, a waitress who was invisible has just become very, very visible. The camera pans back, pulling away from the car as it merges into traffic, pulling further until the Maybach is just one car among thousands, just one story among millions being told in this city every single night. The rain continues to fall. The neon lights continue to reflect. And in the back seat, Elena Rossi, who came to La not wanting to be forgotten, is learning what it means to finally be remembered. The story is far from over. In fact, it's only just beginning. But for now, in this moment, Elena allows herself to close her eyes and breathe. She's made her choice. She's crossed her Rubicon. And as the car carries her toward an uncertain but infinitely more interesting future, she finds herself thinking about that bottle of wine. Beautiful, valuable, irreplaceable. Sometimes the greatest empires are built not on blood or money, but on a single glass of spilled wine and the courage of the woman who spilled it. As Dominic's voice drifts softly beside her, explaining what comes next, Elena understands for the first time what it means to step out of the shadows, and she finds that she doesn't actually mind the light. Actually, if you're enjoying this story, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss what happens next. We have so many more tales from the criminal underworld coming your way. Stories of power and revenge, of dangerous men and the women who change them. The story continues in the safe house, a nondescript brownstone in the heart of Brooklyn Heights that looks like every other brownstone on the block. brown brick, iron railings, a front door that needs a new coat of paint. But inside, the differences are immediately apparent. The windows are bulletproof glass, disguised behind ordinary-looking curtains. The front door is reinforced steel behind its wooden facade. There are cameras at every angle, monitored from a security room in the basement that Marco retreats to after confirming the perimeter. The interior is surprisingly warm for a safe house. Someone has clearly lived here before, or at least someone with taste decorated it. There's a worn leather couch, a bookshelf with actual books, and a kitchen that smells like it's been used for real cooking, not just reheating takeout. Elena finds herself in this kitchen at 4 a.m, sitting at a scarred wooden table across from a man who controls a criminal empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and all they have between them is a pot of black coffee that Dominic made himself, grinding the beans by hand with a wooden grinder he pulled from a cabinet with the ease of someone who's done this 100 times. "You make your own coffee," Elena says, and the surprise in her voice makes Dominic smile. A real smile, not the carefully measured expression he uses in public. "My mother taught me," he says. She believed that any man who couldn't make his own coffee was fundamentally untrustworthy. She also believed that any woman who didn't know how to throw a proper punch was fundamentally unprepared for life. He pours the coffee into 2 ceramic mugs, both chipped, both clearly well used, and slides one across the table to Elena. "She sounds like an extraordinary woman," Elena says. "She was," Dominic replies. Oleg sulks in the past tense hangs in the air like smoke. He wraps his hands around the mug, and Elena notices for the first time how large his hands are, how the tattoos across his knuckles spell out words in Italian that she can now read. Sangue and onore, blood and honor. She thinks about her mother, about the journal in her jacket pocket, about how both of them have built their lives around the ghosts of women who loved them fiercely and left them too soon. "Tell me about the twins," Elena says softly, and Dominic's expression shifts. The ice cracks, and beneath it she sees something raw and vulnerable, something that the rest of the world is never permitted to see. He tells her about Matteo and Luca, about how they're 4 years old and already so different from each other. Matteo quiet and observant, Luca wild and fearless. He tells her about reading to them every night, about how Matteo insists on the same story about a rabbit and a fox while Luca wants something different every time. He tells her about his ex-wife Sofia, about how she was brilliant and beautiful and completely ill-suited for the life she married into. He tells her about the night the twins were born, about how Sofia had started hemorrhaging during delivery, and how the doctors couldn't stop it, about how he held her hand while her grip slowly loosened and the monitors began their terrible, monotone wail. He tells her that he's always believed it was more than a medical complication, that there were people who wanted to hurt him through her, but he could never prove it, never had the leverage to act. He tells her about the twins, about raising them in a world where danger is a constant, present thing. He tells her about building an empire and discovering that an empire built on blood requires constant feeding. And Elena, in return, finds herself telling him things she hasn't told anyone since she arrived in New York. She tells him about Marcus, the full story, not the abbreviated version she rehearsed for when people asked why she moved to the city. She tells him about how they met in graduate school, about how Marcus was charming and attentive and seemed to understand her in a way no one else ever had. She tells him about the first time he raised his voice, about how she rationalized it as stress, about the first time he grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises, about how she wore long sleeves for a week and told herself it was an accident. She tells him about the escalation, the broken phone, the keys hidden so she couldn't leave, the financial control that left her dependent on his generosity. She tells him about the restraining order that Marcus's lawyer got reduced to a peace bond, about the broken arm that happened 3 days later because a peace bond is a suggestion, and Marcus never took suggestions. She tells him about the women's shelter on Broad Street, where a counselor named Jackie gave her a bus ticket and $600 in cash and told her that the only safe direction was away. She tells him about arriving in Penn Station with a duffel bag and her mother's journal and no idea where to go, about sleeping in the bus station the first night because she was too afraid to walk the streets in the dark, about finding the job at La Note through a classified ad in a newspaper she picked up from a bodega floor. She tells him about wanting to be invisible, about how she'd perfected the art of moving through rooms without being noticed, about how she'd trained herself to look at the floor instead of at faces, because faces remember you, and she couldn't afford to be remembered. And she tells him that tonight, when he looked at her across the spilled wine and the silence and the guns, she felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. She felt seen, not hunted, seen. There's a difference, she says, and it's the difference between drowning and swimming. Marcus hunted me, she says, staring into her coffee cup as if she might find clarity in its dark surface. He tracked me. He watched me. He cataloged every move I made so he could use it against me later. But when you looked at me tonight, when you really looked at me, it wasn't like that. She pauses, searching for the words. You weren't trying to control me. You were trying to understand me, and I think that's the first time anyone has done that since my mother died. Dominic is quiet for a long time. The kitchen clock ticks softly on the wall. Outside, the first gray light of dawn is beginning to creep across the Brooklyn sky, painting the kitchen window in shades of pearl and silver. I'm not a good man, Elena, he says finally, and his voice is lower than she's ever heard it. I've done things that would make you run if you knew the full extent of them. I've ordered things. I've sanctioned things. I've looked the other way when I should have intervened, and I've intervened when I should have looked the other way. The world I live in, the world you've now stepped into, doesn't reward kindness. It doesn't reward mercy, and it certainly doesn't reward honesty. He looks at her across the table, and in the growing light she can see every scar, every line, every shadow that the years have carved into his face. But I'm going to be honest with you now, because I think you've earned it, and because I think you can handle it. I didn't keep you alive tonight because you're useful to me. I kept you alive because you did something no one in my world ever does. You risked yourself for someone else with nothing to gain. You heard a threat against my children, and instead of pretending you didn't hear it, instead of protecting yourself by staying silent, you let your body betray the truth. That bottle didn't slip because you're clumsy. It slipped because you're decent. And decency, real, unforced, genuine decency, is the rarest thing I've encountered in 34 years of breathing. Elena feels tears building behind her eyes, and she doesn't fight them. She lets them come, silently, tracking down her cheeks and falling into her coffee cup. Because she's spent 2 years holding everything together, and she's discovering that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself fall apart in front of someone who won't use your vulnerability against you. They sit at that kitchen table, and they talk until the sun rises over Manhattan, until the city wakes up and begins its endless march forward, until the coffee grows cold and Dominic makes another pot, and then another. They talk about small things, favorite books, childhood memories, the way the city sounds different at dawn than at midnight. They talk about large things, justice and power, and whether it's possible to build something good in a world built on something bad. And somewhere between the third cup of coffee and the first rays of golden sunlight hitting the kitchen table, something shifts between them in that small kitchen, something that goes beyond gratitude and danger and obligation. It's not love, not yet. It's too early and too fragile and too surrounded by danger for that particular word. But it's the foundation of something, a recognition, a resonance. Two broken people discovering that their broken edges fit together in a way that neither of them expected. Elena looks at Dominic in the morning light, the scar along his jaw catching the sun, his dark eyes softer than she thought possible, his tattooed hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, and she thinks that this is what courage looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to sit in a kitchen with a dangerous man and tell him the truth about who you are. And Dominic looks at Elena, the small scar above her left eyebrow, the hazel green eyes that see everything, the quiet strength that he recognizes because it mirrors his own. And he thinks that this is what he's been building his empire toward. Not power for its own sake, but the ability to protect something worth protecting. Something that might be the beginning of something else entirely. Hit that like button if you think Elena made the right choice.